Hi, this is JR. This is a brief summary and extension of the Supreme Faith audio that I did yesterday. So, I didn't make any reference to the word sincerity, and I want to separate a few different ideas in regard to sincerity and how it relates to faith and confidence and so on. So the first thing to make reference to is acceptance. So just when there is a perception, like for an infant, for a child of very young age, they just experience perception. So they just accept it. It's a perception. They don't necessarily there might not even be a lot of memory at a very early stage. There's just perception. There's not even a whole lot of point of reference. So there's a perception and it's perceived. So I'll call that acceptance. And I'm putting it in a I don't know how well you can read that, but it just says acceptance in the middle of a piece of paper. So that's perceiving. And related to that is sincerity, which is a somewhat anxious state relative to just acceptance. And if you think about when the issue of sincerity comes up, it would be if someone's being challenged. Do you really believe that? Right? So there's that context of maybe an accusation or a threat of punishment, or some reward is in question. So sincerity comes up in a certain kind of context. And with sincerity, I'm going to exaggerate and say sincerity goes with when something must be, and then there is a filter to prefer things that fit with the perception that now must be. There's a degree of rigidity or I said anxiety, stress around this issue, around whatever issue. So there's sincerity arising here. It's not just, well, this is what I perceive, but there's like that beginnings of defending and rationalizing and no, this is really sincere, and kind of an antagonistic dynamic. A more extreme form of that people call confidence, but my wife suggested that another way to talk about this mode is the term stubborn. So something must be with sincerity. So there's the filter to exclude things that are contrary and to select for things that support whatever perception or interpretation. At some point, though, sincerity, it's like so obvious that there's a controversy, and at that point people can shift over to being stubborn. There has to be a perception of controversy for people to move on to the realm of stubborn. That's when something should be. I know that there's controversy. Maybe it even isn't. It's apparent that it's might not be true, or probably isn't true, but it should be. And that's where you also get into the highest intensity of argumentativeness and desperation even. So while sincerity has a degree of anxiety, stubbornness has a degree of desperation. This should be true. And again, I said I'm making up these categories, so maybe stubborn would fit also with a phrase like it must be true. But there's a there's some kind of like a cyclic thing where there's, disappointment, frustration. This should be true. This must be true. And all those kinds of emotional experiences that people have. In a completely different realm is what I call faith, in the other direction. So what people call confidence sometimes is really just stubbornness, when they are willing to voice their sincerity, to display it, to voice their perception, to not just really say, yes, that is my thing, but to now argue and defend. They also can be really complex. We'll defend what we believe, and we'll attack we'll attack ideas as well as people who disagree, because this should be true. So that's also in the realm of what I was calling fundamentalism in the audio yesterday, or fanaticism would fit there too. And in previous audios I've talked about this as the realm of idealism, idolatry, all of that stuff is over here. Faith, on a different spectrum. It's not the presenting of confidence where I am actually anxious about whether people perceive me to be confident or not, whether they agree with me or not, and all those kind of issues where it's, well, I'm confident this is true, and and all that. That's not what I'm talking about over here with faith. Faith is a really different thing. It is a recognition that a particular perception or interpretation might be true. So it might not, but I'm just in the mode of faith because I don't know for sure. That's when faith is relevant. It might be true, some particular interpretation or perception might be true. It's a possibility, and I'm going to go with that possibility. We could even say it's a presumption, but there's no need for me to defend it or argue about it or have other people agree with me about it. There's not any of that anxiety. It's just faith. I'm aware it could be true. I think of it as a useful perspective or a useful interpretation, and I go with it. And one of the odd things is this is the realm of actual science, where people say, well, this is a presumption, and we're going to operate as if it's true until we have an even better confidence in some other presumption. And yesterday I talked about the supreme faith. I don't know that I want to restate a lot of that, but the idea that there can be a calm confidence, a quality of faith that is by choice. It's not to convince anyone else. It's not to ridicule anyone else. It's just, this is the interpretation that I choose. And given that it's something I choose, I can change it at a later time. I don't need to, apologize if it turns out to be inaccurate. Maybe there is a reason to apologize in some cases, but the fact that I chose a particular interpretation, I don't have to defend it. It was a choice. I knew it might be true. I chose that interpretation, and I went with it. And here's, and then it went from there. So it's also, there's a relaxation with this mode of faith that is not present over in the anxious, idealistic, fundamentalist mode. There's relaxation, a willingness to refine the precision, even discard or dismiss presumptions that are either irrelevant or clearly inaccurate. There's an issue of relevance with regard to faith that there isn't in many other cases. People will argue over things that they'll say, well, it doesn't matter to me, but then they'll argue over it for an hour or a decade or whatever it may be, things that they actually say aren't important to them. But if they're not important, why would they argue at such intensity? So this just spreads out, some of the contrasting ideas of what we could also call from the realm of tension, chronic tension, hypertension, so on, and then the realm of relaxation, flexibility, openness, the supreme faith. It's not based on fear over here, it's based on just a recognition. This realm, frightened, terrified, desperate, frustrated, those kind of, resentful, those kind of sinful modes go over here. Idolatry, I said before. So the supreme faith over here at, a even further extreme of this is the faith of God. Anything is possible. Any interpretation in language is just an interpretation in language, and there's an openness to new interpretations because there's faith. There's not faith in the interpretation. It's not just in a particular interpretation or perception. There's actually a quality of faith that goes beyond any particular one possibility, any particular one thing that might be true. Now it's into the realm of anything is possible. Not that it's true, but what if we look at life from this filter of anything is possible, from a filter of all of our presumptions might be imprecise, might be further refined, something might be more relevant. It's an openness to change. It's like a radically distinct from stubbornness, as well as the typical sincerity that we find when people are trying to protect themselves. So sincerity has a kind of a protective, aspect to it. So the supreme faith, not argumentative, open to other interpretations, other phrasings, interested in results, not so interested in agreement and avoidance and avoiding punishment and exclusion. This is inclusive, this is exclusive. So I hope that has been enlightening for you to have the spectrum spread out in this way. The spectrum that goes through acceptance, sincerity, all the way to stubbornness, and then at the point of tremendous dissatisfaction, agonizing hell, and so on, deep in stubbornness and fundamentalism, sometimes there's an opening for real faith, and that tremendous relief that only comes from relaxing of fundamentalism.